Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Security Boulevard webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap. I think this is going to be an exciting one. I love this topic. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items. But before we even do that, we have a polling question that I want to send out to you guys right now. And while the poll question is live, then I'll go through the housekeeping items. But the first poll has already been sent out to you guys, so you can take a look at it. What are the most common daily attacks that your company has to deal with? So you can choose from account takeover, new account origination, gift card enumeration, inventory/price scraping, or spam and malicious content. So you can go ahead and make your choice there in the polling tab. You can make your choice, and while you're doing that, I'll just go over the few housekeeping items for today's webinar. First of all, today's event is being recorded. So if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for either of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your question and answer tab on the interface and submit your question, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. And now I've already sent out the first of 4 polling questions. So as I said before, that's open for you to go ahead and submit your answer. We'll have 3 more during the course of the webinar. And we also have a great chat interface, and we encourage you to chat out your comments, questions, suggestions, etc. Whatever you want to share with us during the webinar would be great. And we will try to address actually all of the questions or comments that you have sent over to us. And then also near the end of today's webinar, we are going to be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. Okay, with that, we've already kicked off today's webinar, which is Anatomy of an Account Takeover Attack. Our speakers today are David Senecal, who is the Senior Director of Product Architecture at Arkose Labs, and Lizzie Clitheroe, who is the Head of Product Marketing at Arkose. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. To you both, I'm so excited about this, topic. I think it's going to be a great one. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having
us. You bet, you bet. Well, Lizzie, I'm going to take myself off camera, and I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll, and I'll let you know what the poll results are, and then you can go ahead and kick off your presentation. Sound good?
Yes, sounds great.
All right, great.
Awesome, and thanks again for everybody attending the webinar. We've got lots of cool content to share around a subject very near to our hearts at ATO here at Arkose Labs. And looking forward to, we've got a few polls smattered in there to keep everyone on toes and get a bit of interactivity going. So it should be good.
All right, great. Well, the first poll I have closed now. The question was, what are the most common daily attacks that your company has to deal with? The majority of folks, 63%, said spam and malicious content, which I'm sure is no surprise to you. The second largest number, 26%, said account takeover was their most common daily attacks. And then new account origination at 7% and gift card enumeration at 4%. So there you go. Hopefully that's some insight for you to kick off your conversation.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for participating in that. And yeah, good to see ATO for the purposes of this presentation. Good to see ATO up there on the top issues. The spam and abuse, David, I think we do work with a lot of companies that deal with a lot of get to the point that any communication gets abused at this point in the digital economy that we live in, right?
Right, and sounds like with the high popularity on the spam and abuse, I think we should probably do another webinar on this one particularly.
Yeah.
A whole different conversation to have about how this thing happened and how to deal with this sort of situation.
Absolutely. David, for anyone who's not come across him before, is somewhat of a bot expert. So is very knowledgeable about all the different automated ways that people are attacking businesses and sending out some of that automated abuse. So good person to pick his brains on that topic another time. So got some start the presentation off with some stats. Everybody loves the numbers, right? So here's some insights from the Arkose Lab network. So for anyone not familiar with the company, we're a fraud and abuse platform. We work with a bunch of different companies across, lots of different industries, so e-com, media, finance, gaming. There's a lot of that. So across lots of different companies, lots of different geographies. And because of the global reach we have, we get some nice insights into kind of what's going on out there. So here's some numbers and some findings from the whole of 2020. And from the traffic that we see, there is, the majority of it is really attacking the login touch point on the digital businesses that we work with, which, a lot of this is bot driven. You can see, so it's actually 90% plus is bot driven as opposed to human attacks on the login point. And we've got, billions of attacks going on. High attack rate. So by the attack rate, we mean like looking at all the sessions we analyze, what percentage of that is malicious versus legit. So 32% attack rate on all the kind of the login traffic that we're protecting. David, any sort of insights or further commentary on these numbers?
Yeah, I mean, seeing the large amount of the large attack rate on bot versus human is no surprise to me, because to make those attacks scalable, then attackers try to automate as much as possible just to make a good ROI on their attack. So that's a given, and we'll talk about where automation is done in the account takeover in a bit. Now, seeing this high number as well of mobile traffic, or at least what looks like mobile traffic, is not a surprise either, because we protect just as much mobile endpoints that we protect endpoints that are consumed by browsers. So when for the mobile endpoints, and of course bot operators or fraudsters have to make sure that they actually send traffic that represent what's expected on this particular endpoint, in this case mobile.
Absolutely. And I can see everybody sort of shouting in, throwing in where they're coming from, just in case anybody's confused by some accents. So David, you are European, but based in California. I am in England, so it's a bit dark and somber right now. That's why. But good to see people dialing in from across different locations. One of the things that we noticed, probably the biggest trend that came out of when we were looking at the traffic across the Arkose Labs network in 2020, was this big hockey stick of credential stuffing attacks. So the actual numbers of credential stuffing attacks that we were seeing from Q3 to Q4 basically doubled, and then it basically doubled again from Q4 over Q3. So it's something that and David is just talking about how the bots were really driving some spikes in attack. And when we're kind of looking at the attack traffic, you can see these kind of concerted, automated driven attacks, which really kind of spike up the attack volumes at particular times. So yeah, it was a really interesting trend that we spotted. So we have another poll for everybody. Charlene, are you going to jump in?
Absolutely. I'm pushing the poll out right now. The poll is, what is your top concern on how account takeovers affect your business? You can choose from lost customers, decreased revenue, brand reputation, compliance concerns, and reduced market share. So again, you can go ahead and make that choice. And Lizzie, I'll let you go ahead and continue on with your presentation. When you're done, we'll go ahead and take a look at the poll results.
Sounds good. And recently, Arkose Labs, we did some industry research into specifically around the topic of account takeover, just kind of get a bit of a pulse check from folks, IT folks, on how they're viewing this. And it might be interesting to kind of see how the attendees today answer compared to this industry research we've just done. And according to the sort of 100 or so folk we surveyed before this webinar, top concern was actually compliance, which is quite surprising, followed by brand reputation, decreased revenue, lost customers, and then reduced market share. Don't let any of this influence your own answers.
Yeah, personally, I would have put my money on brand reputation because, as a consumer, hearing sometimes that your account has been taken over is never a good thing, right? So personally, I've been a bit surprised by these results on seeing such a high, such high value for compliance.
Yeah, I had a similar reaction, and we will come on to some more, kind of delve into a bit more of what we found out. But one of the things was around kind of the concern around leaking like identity data. So I think that's probably kind of one of the reasons that ended up being so high. But yeah, on brand reputation, we've got we've got so many communication channels to moan about customers that are letting them down on this front, then it is quite surprising that didn't come up to number one.
Right.
I'll give it another second. Do you have the results from the poll?
Absolutely. Yes. I do have the results for you. The question was, what is your top concern on how account takeovers affect your business? The majority of folks said compliance concerns. That's 38%. That's really, really interesting. The second place at 26% said brand reputation, and then 21% said lost customers. The remaining 15% said decreased revenue. So that's really interesting. That really shows that revenue at the end of the day isn't half as valuable to these people as just keeping the business in good graces, if you will, with its customers. So interesting results there.
It's interesting. Yeah. It does mirror the industry research quite well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's absolutely. It looks like our public right now is in line with the people that we polled in the past.
Yeah. Great minds think alike, everybody.
Yeah.
So here's some other insights from the recent survey we did, and I'll share this with you. And then after this, we're going to be throwing it over to David to kind of get into the nitty gritty around like how do these attacks happen, strategies that businesses can pursue to protect against it. So 31% of reported ATO as a top user security issue. 90% when asked whether ATO negatively impacts user experience, agreed. And as I kind of mentioned before, the top concern around ATO that came out from this research was around compromised identity credentials. And one also really interesting aspect to think about is, kind of the operational burden that comes with this stuff. With pretty high levels of people hours involved in actually remediating attacks because people having to get in touch. And it's an interesting dynamic that we have to deal with when protecting against this stuff because, if you go too harsh and you're blocking people out of their accounts because you think it's an ATO, that's also an operational burden. It's expensive, it's slow, it irritates the hell out of customers. But then, the minute you're letting stuff through attacks through the net and actually getting people's accounts compromised, then you're also dealing with that real headache operationally and user experience wise. Kind of like getting the balance is somewhat of an art.
Right. So when we talk about account takeover, sometimes you hear the ATO, account takeover, account checker, account enumeration, credential stuffing. So those are, typical vocabulary that's typically associated with ATO overall. And really, ATO is generally a three-step process. The first step is typically what we call credential harvesting, where somebody is going to go out there and target a particular website and use their skills to try to extract some valuable information, and some of them are credential that may be stored on the website. And we'll see in a minute on how this works. Then the second step typically is credential checking, which basically something will take that list that has previously been stolen and actually try to replace them against multiple targets. And it's a way to further enhance the value of that initial list and see whether it's valid or not against other website. And finally, typically the last step is really when the real fraud is happening and when the account is really taken over. Somebody else will actually take care of using those validated credentials and try to exploit the account now.
And is that typically different folks in distinct groups doing those individual steps?
Yeah, I mean, typically you have people who specialize in one area or another, because this is quite possible that some actually may carry out the whole 3 steps on their own, but some step require specific skills, and we see a lot of specialization in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So let's talk about the first step of account takeover, the harvesting part of it. So in this scenario, I'm going to talk about fictitious fraudsters, and let me introduce you to our first fraudsters, who's the Dark Knight. So the Dark Knight is a bit of a cheese enthusiast, and he's done the business with his company ILikeCheese.com, and last time he actually received a package, it turned out that the box was very smelly and he didn't like it, and he tried to get his money back. It never happened with ILikeCheese.com. So ever since, he's been trying to get back to that company. And in his spare time, what the Dark Knight is doing is doing like penetration testing. And in this case, if he's finding that I might use my skills to actually try to get back to that company who's not listening to me, and try to extract their credentials. So some of the techniques that can be used in that case is application layer attacks. And one of them, for example, is doing a SQL injections. So what's a SQL injection? So SQL injection is a simple, it can be simple, but it's a request that the attacker will send, and at the end of the request will append a SQL statement that holds to true. And if the site is not well protected, doesn't have a web application firewall, for example, then in return, not only will the attacker be able to log in, but also in return will get the whole list of credentials. And this is exactly what's happening in this case here. And now our friend the Dark Knight has this list of credentials that he was able to download. So now it's all nice and good. He's got a list of credentials, so potentially he can spare some of those credentials for himself to buy some free cheese. But in general, what they do is fraudsters try to monetize that information that they don't need further. And one way to do this is potentially publish that list on the dark web, hoping that somebody will be interested and buy the list.
I guess this breach is uncovered. ILikeCheese.com can have some pretty bad press if it comes out that it's leaking people's data.
Yeah, absolutely, and that happens to all of us, where sometimes we hear about so some of those breaches, and we may or may not be part of it. Yeah. So now the second step of let's talk about second step of which is account checking. So meet our second fraudster here, Robin. So Robin is the Dark Knight's sidekick, and Robin always keep an eye about new lists that are published on the dark web. And his job, he likes to do account checking. So he's going to take a list and then replace that list against different targets. So it just happened that he sees that there's a list from ILikeCheese.com. So he decided, let's download it. And when he downloaded it, that's when the Dark Knights here gets paid. So you kind of start to see the whole economy surrounding account takeover taking place here. So now Robin has this list from ILikeCheese.com. So what Robin is taking advantage of here is that the fact that a lot of people use the same username and password against multiple websites. And chances are, if you like cheese, and if you're a Frenchman like myself, you may be liking wine as well, because cheese and wine, they go very well together, if you ask me. And the way that's pretty much how Robin will decide to choose his target. So in this case, let's look at mywine.com, who's another website that sells wine. And chances are maybe if people have bought cheese, they bought wine. So let's try to replace those credentials against mywine.com and see what happens. Now, the list that Robin downloaded has millions of accounts, literally. So it's not possible for him to do that manually, one by one. It would take years. So the best way to do this is through automation and use a botnet and distribute that list across the different nodes of a botnet and see which ones are valid. And within a few hours, then Robin will be able to validate, have a refined list of accounts that are actually valid on mywine.com.
It's interesting that not so long ago, the fraud monetization was really purely around kind of financial information, financial transactions, whereas big bucks these days in the identity credentials. Lots of ways to monetize on that front.
Yeah, I mean, fraudsters, just like any companies, they're catching up on monetizing data, and for them, that's their data, the credentials, right? So now that our friend Robin has this list of refined list of valid account for like wine.com. So what is he going to do with it? Well, potentially he will keep some of the account for himself, so that he can buy himself some nice wine, exploit the account, do this sort of things. But literally here, potentially he got a lead of tens of thousands of valid accounts. So it's potentially smaller than what we originally had from the breach from cheese.com, but it's still too much, for one person to handle. So what's the best way to monetize this? Well, let's publish this on the dark web and see if somebody wants to buy it. So now meet our third fraudster. We call him the Joker. So the Joker is into fraud, and he knows that mywine.com has a very lucrative, reward program and gift card program, and these sort of things. And he's always wanted to put his hand on a list of valid credentials for that website. And it just happens that one got published on the dark web. So what he's going to do is download it, and that's when Robin gets paid here. So again, you're seeing that how Robin can profit of all this operation. So what will the Joker do with all these tens of thousand accounts? Well, the Joker's got his time in, and is in the business of really taking over the account and exploiting. And he's going to go one by one on each account and see what's available on the account. Maybe some of them will have nothing. Some of them will have gift card. Maybe he'll use some of them to actually buy someone, have the wine shipped over to himself. Ultimately, he wants to make as much money as possible exploiting this list of accounts, and he may find some way to potentially transfer some credit to his bank. So that's how he gets paid as well. So you see that pretty much they're pretty creative in finding ways to exploit the information as much as possible.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to see the ways that people monetize ATO attacks on different types of businesses outside mywine.com. Gaming companies being hacked into, and people getting virtual currency, selling on assets. But sometimes like those accounts can be like worth thousands, which is insane. Banks that's clearly like protecting people's funds, and all the different industries do have a lot of value in those accounts, and the people have really honed in on what that value is and how to extract it.
Absolutely, yeah, right.
So we've got another poll, folks.
All right.
Here we go.
Yep, the poll question is up on your interface now. The question is, what are the best ways to deal with these attacks? You can choose from strong password policy, integrate a WAP solution, integrate a bot management solution, integrate a fraud detection solution, build your own detection, or all of the above. We'll go ahead and leave the poll open for a little bit, and I guess you guys can go ahead and continue with your presentation, and we'll circle back and take a look at the poll results when you're ready.
Right. So, at the end of the day, there's a lot that a website owner can do to actually try to prevent this sort of account takeover and all these credential breaches that we hear about so often. So one thing that website owners should enforce is, good username and password hygiene. Making sure that they enforce a policy where the username and password the password specifically is changed on a regular basis to avoid the situation where, one password is the same across multiple websites. Another thing to do is making sure that, you assess your network security and you have a WAF in place just to make sure that you don't get impacted by this sort of breach, the simple breach that we saw earlier, where a SQL injection allows you to download the full list of credentials. The question, though, is it enough?
Yeah. And it's interesting that you think that this is like the absolute table stakes, everyone's doing it. I'm sure everybody saw the news around SolarWinds blaming some intern for accessing putting a password like password 123 on a server. And it's astonishing that, companies are still not quite getting the basics right. Do you think there's a big problem, David, or most people are getting that right?
Well, I mean, there's definitely a problem around this. I think larger companies with, big online presence, of course, they put more emphasis into making sure that their network is secure and all of this. But, it's always a risk. There's always a risk. And the biggest risk that we're dealing with already here is the fact that users, at the end of the day, keep reusing the same username and password across websites. So it doesn't matter if you actually, as a website owner, you're super secure and you have like all this, you do the right thing. But at the end of the day, you're a victim of the fact that a breach happened somewhere else. And as part of the breach, there's credentials that will be valid against your website.
Yeah, I guess you've got to be operating under the assumption that the credentials are out there, right?
Exactly. So do we have the poll results yet?
Yes, we do. The question was, what are the best ways to deal with these attacks? An overwhelming 3/4 of poll answers, for lack of a better word, 76% said all of the above, and only 14% said integrate a fraud detection solution, and 8% said a strong password policy, and 3% said integrate a WAF solution. So nobody selected integrate a bot management solution or build your own detection.
Right. So, I mean, yeah, all of the above is definitely the right way to go if you want a complete 360 protection. That's really the most efficient. Of course, you working with a vendor will potentially help you a lot because they may cover a lot of the surface area, the attack surface. So then you don't have to do so much. But in the most complex cases, then it's definitely valuable sometimes to have like different things in place, and like build your own thing, and bot detection, fraud detection. Although a fraud detection product typically does bot detection as well. So a variety of layers to protect against this sort of attacks. Now let's dive a bit more into it. So assuming you have a fraud detection solution in place, how could it help in the scenarios that we've seen before? So first of all, looking at the first step where the Dark Knight was actually doing extracting all these credentials, stealing those credentials, doing a security breach. Then, of course, in that case, you need a WAF at the minimum to be able to protect yourself. But that may or may not be enough. You need to make sure that your access to your website are secure and so on, just the stuff that we've talked about earlier. But in the case of account checking, the second step, that where Robin was replaying the list from ILikeCheese.com against mywine.com, then in that case, a fraud detection solution will actually help you detect all that bot activity and prevent the attack from being successful. So then in that case, Robin will not be able to actually get his list of verify his list of credentials, and the attack in this case is not successful. Now let's assume that for some reason some credential actually got leaked, and the Joker here got hold of some of them. But the fact that potentially the Joker is at a completely different location than the typical user, the owner of the account, then a fraud detection solution will actually detect these sort of scenarios, and based on that, be able to block the attack and make, prevent the account from being taken over.
And I'll just comment on one of the questions that came in, a comment around, what's the best approaches to deal with this sort of stuff. That there's one around passwordless tech that, David, maybe we could get you to answer that in a bit. And one commenting on the benefits of MFA as well. And it's interesting that one of the things that Arkose Labs deals with is, because obviously MFA has very high friction for those folk that does get pushed through that. How much can you reduce the amount of traffic being sent to MFA by doing other checks that aren't quite so onerous and don't require opt-in and huge token by token costs. But could probably do a whole other webinar on that topic. So
yeah,
it's an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, MFA for sure is definitely. I see more and more websites actually go to MFA as well, and but it has a cost. So adding that as a layer to when you're not sure, as if the request or the session looks suspicious, then have that as a way to potentially further challenge the user is definitely a good idea. But yeah, we didn't mention MFA, but there's definitely a part of the toolbox here.
Clearly.
All right. So we talked about how how the attacks happens, but let's talk about how to defend against it. What's those fraud detection solution? What do they really do? So that's I've been dealing with fraud and abuse, trying to defend side against fraud and abuse for the last 10 years. And over the last 10 years, I've seen a lot of things. And there's been always like two schools of thought. And slowly we'll see that how those schools of thought are kind of starting to merge together. So there's always been like the transparent detection school of thought. And we'll talk about it in a bit, what it means. And interactive challenge school of thought, and also known as a CAPTCHA. So what the transparent detection looks like. So we'll talk here about how things have evolved over time. And 10 years ago, things, the way the attacks were and how to defend them were much simpler than they are today. So 10 years ago, we're dealing with small botnets, simple scripts. So at the end of the day, you could usually detect them by simply the fact that they were, you would see an IP that was making a hell of a lot of requests, in very abnormal rate of requests. And so you could simply detect or block them through IP blocking or through rate limiting as well, or because the script was pretty simplistic, it really had a very characteristic header signature that's unlike any signatures that you would see from a valid request coming from Firefox or Chrome. But then, of course, as soon as those detection methods were in place, then the botnets got larger and the scripts became a bit more advanced just to defeat those earlier detections that were put in place. So us as defenders, then we had to evolve our detection again. So that's where came the era of IP intelligence, where IP reputation and these sort of things. And also at this time, this is when we started to develop technologies to force the client to run our JavaScript. And the purpose of this was to validate whether the client, like any legitimate browser, should be able to execute JavaScript absolutely fine. And yet a botnet typically at that time was not. So forcing them to run our JavaScript and then to see if they are able or not. And then if they are, then collect different information to learn more about the client, and then detect whether we're still dealing with something that's suspicious or not.
Yeah, it's interesting that things like IP intelligence, I think, is pretty foundational and key to a lot of strategy around detection at this point. But the fact that it was really avant-garde at one point and really kind of bleeding edge, but it's now just become sort of like table stakes. Everybody has to do it, and it's just different sources of different intelligence and tuning that intelligence, I guess.
Right, absolutely. And it's not like today, because the attacks have evolved, it's not like you don't need these sort of things anymore. You do absolutely need it. But today is like it's part of the standard. Back then it was like, wow, great. You have that.
Yeah. It's like the never-ending shopping list of things that need to need to be added to.
Exactly. So, now that we have all these different technology back then, but again, botnets become even larger and more complex script, just again to defeat the evolution of those botnets. And instead of being like in the thousands of nodes within the botnet, you were looking at tens of thousands of nodes. Those are very common these days. And the scripts will then the attacker will realize that, hey, well, now we're looking to extract information, and our way back then, our naive way to kind of figure whether a client was supporting JavaScript or not, was actually if we receive that data that we're collecting, that fingerprint we're collecting from the client without JavaScript, then that means they support JavaScript. But it's actually easy to pretend you send that data without even having to run JavaScript. So in that case, then we had to evolve our detection to really force the client to run our JavaScript. So technology like proof of work, which will give the JavaScript a unique mathematical challenge to execute every single time, or at least every single session, will force them to run JavaScript, and that's a bit more harder to fake. And also, what we realized that sometimes they will send us fingerprint, but at the end, they will randomize certain information in there. So we develop a device intelligence technology so that we could then recognize whether that information that's being sent to us, whether it's valid or not. So device intelligence came out, and also we had to verify whether a client will replay good fingerprints. So if we see too much of a fingerprint coming back from the same IP, for example, that's never good news. So replay detection became very important as well. But they did not stop there, of course. As soon as we forced them to run JavaScript, then sure enough, they did run JavaScript. So they went headless. So headless browsers are basically botnets that run on top of a browser, and they do run JavaScript, so they can resolve proof of work all day long. So in that case, we had to invest technology to be able to detect headless browsers better than before, and also verify who's really controlling that machine. Is the machine controlling itself, or is it controlled by humans? So looking at behavioral biometrics like mouse movement, key press, and these sort of things help us really evaluate the interaction that the user has with the machine, and really verify that, yes, we're indeed dealing with something that's legit.
And how tricky is it for these attackers to deploy the more complex forms of attacks? I mean, do they have to all be technical masterminds, or is it all kind of pretty easy access at this point?
So it's a bit of both, because you end up you have a lot of frameworks. Hackers, they develop frameworks, they develop tools, and they more often than not, they like to share, they like to publish them. Some of them actually like to sell them as well. So there's a whole market out there of selling tools and products that will help us, help you as an attacker, if you're an attacker, to do a successful attack without really much knowledge. All you need to know is what's your target, and you can choose different options about how you want to attack and to what rate you want to attack, and push submit, and you're done. So a lot of this is it's pretty standardized, unfortunately. So that's the sort of things that we pay attention a lot as building a new detection, is try to figure out what are the state of the art in terms of attacks, so that we can match that capability. So it's complex.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now I talked about the interactive challenge, so known as a CAPTCHA. So how has it evolved over the years? Well, 10 years ago, I'm sure you remember all these word puzzles that we have, and initially they were easy to read, but then over time they got a bit more complex to read. You had some noise in the background, some wave, and the reason they did that is because as soon as this technology was introduced, then it was the botnets kind of evolved into be able to recognize characters or CRs, where becoming pretty intelligent. So although those word puzzle were a bit harder for humans to read, they were actually easy for attackers to for botnets that has an OCR fitted to be able to recognize. So then it has to everything has to evolve, and that's where we started to see image puzzles. So a bit more user friendly. You had to click the bridge, click the bus, and all those sort of things. And there's a bit more user friendly. But then, of course, image recognition started to get better and better. There's actually quite a lot of AI framework out there where you can just plug in a bunch of photos of yours and they will recognize, pictures at bridges and so on. So of course, attackers actually use that to be able to evolve their botnet.
Yeah, it doesn't work quite so well, and the bots find it easier to solve these things than the actual humans sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, companies like Arkose Labs, we took a different approach where it's more like a mini game sort of approach. So it provided a much better user experience, much easier for even kids to handle if they were the ones that are being challenged. And also they're a bit more difficult for machine vision to be able to play the game. So there has to be specially trained botnets that can play that particular game versus a different game. So that's just different evolution of things. But of course, if the stakes are high in terms of the money you can make out of the resources being exploited, then it's easy. The people will actually go to the extra step and try to build a botnet that can play the game. So that's where you have to be more intelligent and have a set of games, completely different set of games that you can throw at the botnet. If for somehow they try to recognize they can automatically play the game and resolve the puzzle, then you want to be able to put them completely off track and make not worth their while by sending them games that's completely different than the ones they've been training their botnet on. And of course, on top of that, we want to, while they're interacting with the game, we want to collect some data about the client to really see who's interacting with the machine and what type of machine is executing the program. So we talked about the two different things: the transparent detection, the interactive detection. So what's really the state of the art today? And really, the state of the art is to combine both. If you have both the transparent detection and interactive challenge, that's where you're going to get the best of both worlds. And in that case, not only are you going to be able to efficiently detect fraud, but also you have the choice to selectively challenge what looks to you suspicious. And if for some reason you end up challenging clients that's a real human, then through the game, the interaction of the challenge, they will be able to redeem themselves. So more and more, you being able to detect is great. You absolutely need to do this. But of course, for any website, the user experience is, it's a prime citizen, and we have to make sure that we preserve that even while we're evaluating a session, a client, and trying to detect fraud in the process.
Yeah, and it's kind of getting to that point. You've got that whole extra layer of kind of user behavioral analytics and kind of intel on the behavior as bots become more and more skilled in the art of mimicking real life folk.
Yep.
It's a challenge.
Exactly. Yep. Okay, now we have another polling question.
Yeah, so the last polling question should be on your screen now. The question is, what causes your organization the biggest headache? You can choose from high volume, low sophistication, high volume, high sophistication, or low volume, high sophistication. Go ahead and make your selection. And as with the other polls, I'll leave it open for a little bit. Let folks go ahead and make their selection. David, you and Lizzie can go ahead and go on with your presentation, and we'll revisit the results of the polling question very soon.
Thank you. So what we see really typically is the attacks that are happening against a website. The sophistication of the attack really depends on the potential for monetization. In the case of low monetization, basically there's not as much incentive for the bot operators to actually develop a very complex system. And in that case, typically we're going to see fairly low sophistication and fairly low persistence as well at the end. Whereas if the monetization potential is very high, then what we're going to see is, it doesn't really matter what we're trying to do. They will always try to go to the next level. And this, typically it reflects, the story I was telling you earlier about how how we had to evolve the detection based on how the attacks evolve is pretty much something that we're seeing every day, where as soon as we start to protect a new customer, typically what we're going to see is that the type of botnets that we're dealing with is fairly low sophistication, and we can catch them right away. But as time goes by, we start to see those botnets that are attacking this one customer shifting and evolving and really trying hard to defeat all the detections that are in the way. So, my job is to always advance the detection engine for Arkose Labs. So we're always trying to look ahead and try to anticipate how the botnets will, based on the current attack surface and based on what we have in place as detection, where are the holes that potentially a botnet or bot operators can exploit to be able to do a successful attack. So it's a constant cat and mouse game. And basically, for when we have high monetization potential, we see that the attackers will be extremely persistent, and they will try very hard to do whatever it takes to be able to make the attack successful.
Yeah, and I think this whole concept is quite kind of central to how we as a company approach the problem, in that, really understanding the economic drivers behind attacks, and that the people attacking websites have got particular ROI and got particular threshold that it's the minute they're getting enough resistance that it eats into the actual profit, they'll drop off. But it really really does depend on kind of what the end goal is, what the type of attack is, and kind of how big the payout is, on the lengths they'll go to throw time, resources, effort, and sophisticated tools at the problem.
Yep. So do we have the poll results now to see if they concur with my analysis?
Yeah.
Yes, we do. And I got to tell you, Ajoy loves your bots, by the way. He did chat in there.
Yeah.
So the question was, what causes your organization the biggest headache? The majority of folks, 39%, the largest percentage, said high volume, low sophistication. The next largest percent, 33%, said low volume, high sophistication. 28% said high volume, high sophistication.
Right. Okay.
Interesting. Yeah.
I think that's. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that fits in with a lot of companies out there we speak to are kind of that pain point. It really, I think that does kind of tally with what we're seeing out there.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, it's all going to depend what's currently in place in those organizations to deal with the problem. Because again, if there's nothing in place or not much in place, then there's no incentive for the attacker to actually evolve their botnet. They're going to, if they're successful with a single bot hammering away at the site, they will just do that because that's cheaper for them to do with it. Now, if there's like a different layers of protection, that's a different story. Then they're going to have to adapt their attacks to be able to more or less defeat all the different layers of defense that are in place. So, we talked about what happened over the last 10 years, but what does the future hold? What does it look like? Well, the problem that we have, as I said earlier, not only the complexity of the attacks are evolving, but also the complexity, the internet ecosystem is becoming more and more complex. You have things like IoT. So 10 years ago, we didn't have to worry so much about mobile devices, to be honest, because it was fairly nascent. Now everything is mobile, and everything is there's a lot of things that can connect to the internet, that can log into the internet. So all of this makes our life a bit more complex because, of course, as Defender, each device or type of thing will have a different capability. And then that for us Defenders, that means that we have to adapt to this environment and adapt to those capabilities of those devices and adapt, provide a solution that actually would also work on those interfaces. Privacy and regulation.
It's interesting. It's not.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, interrupt your play. Yeah, it's interesting that I always kind of thought it was a bit of a niche problem. Are you going to worry about like your fridge IoT and like your smart fridge? But we work with a bunch of streaming companies that they absolutely have to protect logins on smart TVs. So this is become much more of a kind of pressing issue for a lot of companies in certain sectors.
Right. And we're also dealing with a lot of gaming company, and of course we're looking at consoles and all of these sort of things, and it makes our life interesting for sure.
Yeah.
So the second thing is like privacy regulation. So as a private citizen, of course, I like to have my own privacy, but the reason why there is those privacy regulation is because companies have abused their rights to extract and use data from internet users. And unfortunately for us, fraud detection company, sometimes the type of data that is becoming harder to get is the type of data we absolutely need to be able to efficiently detect and differentiate fraudsters from regular traffic. So that's becoming more and more of a challenge. It's not an impossible challenge to deal with, and of course, as a company, we need to abide to any privacy regulation worldwide. But that's also another consideration that we have to keep in mind. It's not just about focusing about what can we do to detect the bad activity. It's also what can we also do to make sure we're compliant with all the regulation that are available worldwide. Similar to that, W3C standards, so they pretty much define what can you do, what can you collect, the sort of data you can collect, and there's more and more restrictions. Browser vendors as well had more privacy features into their product. So, all of this is good. It's of course to protect users' privacy, but again, the point here is that it makes our life a bit more interesting as well. And artificial intelligence, again, we as a security provider, we use artificial intelligence to be able to efficiently detect botnet and so on. But so do attackers. They kind of caught on into that trend. They mastered the automation, and if they're the most skills, of course, they will use artificial intelligence to be able to figure out the best way to defeat detection. So lastly, we talk about a lot of things. So what are the main takeaways from all of this? Well, first of all, as we can see, the online fraud is a growing problem, and it's not going away anytime soon. It's a very hard problem to deal with. There's no question about it. And the good news is, I guess, it's good job security for me and for us.
Yeah, a lot of people on the webinar, I guess, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. To be honest, when I started dealing with fraud and bot detection 10 years ago, I saw that, after a couple of years, I would have come up with a product that was strong enough and I would move on to something else. 10 years later, actually 11 years later now, look where I am. I'm still talking about the same thing. And I think by now I can retire on this. Great, so that's it. Do we have any question from the audience?
Well, we do have some questions that have come in. We have about 5 minutes to the top of the hour, which means we have time for 1 or 2 questions here. We've gotten some good ones in too. So let's see. Here's one from Ajoy. What would you recommend against insider threats in terms of ATO? Of course, RBAC, et cetera, are or could be implemented, but what would be even better than 2-factor authentication and other related techniques?
Wow, that's a tough question. Insider threat, that's a whole different ballgame for sure. So far what we've been talking about was a lot more to do about outside threat that kind of take advantage of your public facing interface. But insider threat, that's definitely a hard problem. I don't know, a combination of good security policy, training, because sometimes those insider threats are not necessarily bad people who want to do things in purpose. As sometimes it's just they don't know that what they're trying to do is not legit. So what we see, what our company is doing basically, and what I've seen in previous companies that I work for, is like good education around what's acceptable to do and what's not acceptable, the risk around doing various activities. So I think it really comes down to the InfoSec group to really build good solid security policies and awareness around the risk. And of course maybe this, if you're not sure about a particular person, then you need to monitor more closely. But it's everything that I've talked about today. It's a different story basically.
Okay. All right. Well, we are about 3 minutes to the top of the hour. If you can answer this one in 1 minute, we'll go ahead and address this. L, I don't have a full name here, says, he asks, would passwordless technology help reduce such attacks?
Well, yeah, in a way, it's a passwordless technology, then ATO goes away, but it really depends whether that passwordless technology, the sort of safety built in just to prevent any abuse. The thing is, like, password, username, password is the first step to log in. Now, once you log in, typically you get some sort of token. Now, if this token is stolen and then replayed replayed by somebody else, and they gain as much access as you do. So, yeah, it's
yes and no, right?
Yeah, and
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, just add to that very quickly, of course, Charlene, is that, when you're thinking about it from a kind of behavioral biometrics and sort of assessing user behavior, there is kind of some value in actually getting the user to go through the process and sort of analyze. So not even if you're 100% reliant on the password, which we shouldn't be, but actually kind of getting the interaction and seeing how people behave and go through what should be a normal user interaction.
All right. Well, we are about 2 minutes to the top of the hour. So unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for the question and answer period. But I do want to thank everybody who did submit questions. Mike, I know we didn't get to your question/comment, but please know that the folks at Arkose are getting a copy of all of the questions that came in. And I'm sure somebody from the organization will be more than happy to follow up with you offline and get your question answered. A quick reminder that today's event has been recorded, so if you missed any or all of the event, or if you just want to watch it again, you will have the opportunity to do so. We will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand, and the webinar is also going to be on the Security Boulevard website, so you can always go look for it there. Just go to securityboulevard.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. Okay, real quick before we close things down, let's do the drawing for the $425 Amazon gift cards. Our winners today are Frank D. Congratulations, Frank. Natalia B. Congratulations, Natalia. Joe D. Congratulations, Joe. And finally, Chris S. Congratulations, Chris. Congratulations to all four of you. We'll be following up with you via email to get your Amazon gift card over to you. So check your inbox. And if you don't see anything there, please check your spam folder. Lizzie and David, thank you both. What a great presentation. So much information. I just, you know, I was blown away by it. And I know, judging from the interaction we got from the audience, they loved it too. So thank you so much. I do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.